Hey guys, it's Shannon. Thank you so much for watching the video this week. I really do appreciate it. This week, I want to talk to you about how to make your podcast sound professional. Now, this isn't just from an audio quality standpoint. I'm also talking about from a content delivery standpoint. You as the host delivering the content. And that's where a lot of the magic happens. Some podcasters seem to think that a lot of it has to deal with the audio quality. And even though the audio quality is important, it's just not the entire full circle and scope of podcasting. And this is just something that I've taken from the broadcasting world and implemented it into the podcasting world. So it's very important to understand that as you deliver the content, that is really what's going to keep your listeners coming back and listening to you. Now, if you're like me and you jump into the iTunes store, you might see a podcast with some really cool cover art and you're like, oh, great. And you read the description, you go, oh, this looks like it's amazing. And you click on it, you listen to it, and the audio quality is poor, or the host is poor, or there's just nothing that is really great about the podcast. This is where you say you can't judge a book by its cover, because once you jump in and you start listening, it can sound very, very poor. So this is what I'm really trying to do for podcasters who maybe already have a podcast, but are looking to try to make that podcast sound a lot better. I'm looking to give you at least 4 tips today that you can take with you and implement into the podcast and make it better over time. So don't worry about if you already have the podcast started. You can always implement this over time and become a little bit better. So let's go ahead into tip number 1. So the first tip is really in the form of a question. The question is, do I really need to make my podcast sound professional? My answer is always going to be yes. And there's a couple of reasons for this. We are now seeing your phone, and you're starting to see Android phones, iPhones, and your cars all starting to integrate together. And I'm not just talking about through Bluetooth technology. I'm talking about through operating systems that are using Android and, of course, an iOS operating system. So now we're starting to see your phone playing podcasts into the car. And this is now giving you the opportunity to not just listen to terrestrial radio, but to listen to your favorite podcast in your car. And your podcast needs to be just as professional as what you're hearing already on the radio, in terrestrial radio. So you could say it's a form of competition with terrestrial radio. Now, for podcasters out there, don't get discouraged about whether or not you have the best possible quality audio. You can always work towards making that audio better, but if you want to go ahead and step into the game and be competitive with that listener in terms of getting their attention and listening to your podcast, your audio quality needs to sound great, and it needs to come out of your car's stereo or your headphones in both channels. I heard a podcast just the other day, had great content, had great hosts, had great guests, but the audio was only coming out of the left channel of my car, and it was very, very annoying. So make sure that your audio quality is fine-tuned and you've made it sound perfect so that people can listen to it. Tip number 2 is always use a condenser microphone. You might be using your webcam's microphone. You might be using your laptop's microphone. And even though those are okay, they're not the best. I recommend that you buy a condenser microphone. This particular microphone I have is a blue Yeti Pro. It is plugged into my mixing board, and this is the sound that you're getting out of the mixing board. This is clean audio. This is what you should be striving to go ahead and put out there into the world. You can also get the downgraded version of this, which is just the blue Yeti. It's a silver microphone. Actually, this is what it looks like right here. So you can pick it up and through Amazon.com, or I think you can also get it through bluemicrophones.com, and it's going to cost you maybe about $100. There's also an Audio-Technica microphone that is priced around the same area. It's called the AT2020. Those are great microphones you can use in your podcast. So really make it an effort to make your podcast audio sound great with that quality audio coming out of the microphone. Tip number 3 is really about the host, and it's about the delivery of the content and the host's chatter between maybe a co-host or maybe the guest. Avoid too much chatter in the beginning of your podcast. Something that can be taken from the radio industry world where I come from and implement it into the podcasting world is don't chatter too much. When your podcast first starts out, you probably have about a minute to a minute and a half of time where you can get all that little chatter out of the way and then implement some form of an agenda so that your listener knows what to expect when they listen to your podcast. Don't just go into the podcast and just start talking for 10, 15 minutes and then the listener's like, well, what am I listening to here? The listener should never have to rely on the title of your podcast and the description of your podcast. You should always give them the opportunity to know what is coming up in the podcast by front selling what is going to be happening in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Always give them a heads up of what is happening. A little bullet point that you can take underneath or put underneath this area is avoid nervous laughter if you're a host. Nervous laughter meaning that if you're talking to your guest and you're always laughing and you're like, typically that means that you don't know what to say next. You have no clue what to say next because you're so focused on trying to make the interview sound great. So avoid nervous laughter and avoid over confirming to your guest. Over confirming meaning that your guest is talking and giving talking points and you're constantly saying, yeah, right, that can be very annoying to the listener on their end, and they'll go, oh, I just don't even want to listen to this person. But it might be tolerable enough for the listener to say, okay, I can tolerate this, but man, they really need to just get rid of that crutch of just saying, yeah. That can be very annoying. So work on your crutches. Go back and listen to your own podcast and figure out where your crutches are and try to work on them and try to find different ways, or maybe even cut back on those over confirming statements. Okay. One more tip before I get out of here and let you go on with your day, and is really going back to tip number 2 about your microphone. If you're using those webcam microphones or your laptop microphones, just a little tip. It sounds as though you're talking in a hallway, and it makes that sound very, very tinny. So that's why you want to use a condenser microphone. Okay. So that's going to go ahead and do it for this week. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do appreciate it. There's plenty more over on my YouTube channel. You can head on over there, or just go on over to shannonjhernandez.com and jump on the email subscribe list. That's where my email subscribers get the really cool stuff. They get the very inspirational stuff, and they also get maybe some additional tips on podcasting too. So that's where you need to go if you want to hear more from me and get more great content like this video that you're watching. So have a great week, everyone.